everyone, PushingUpRoses here, and today we're going to be looking at licensed video games, a concept dating back to the 70s that resulted in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I would like to point out that I thought I had some sweet wordplay there with that last sentence, but much to my chagrin, I couldn't find a game based on that movie. I mean, there's Red Dead Redemption, so close enough. I'm marking this joke as successful. I don't want to simply talk about specific licensed games, but rather what makes a decent one. Because so many licensed titles were basically cash-ins with very few redeeming qualities, it's hard to find something that stays at least somewhat true to the source material and has functioning mechanics. They do exist, of course, but I thought it would be a good idea to compare and contrast some of the more interesting titles I've come across over the years and determine what makes the good ones good and what makes the shitty ones shitty. Now, to be clear, this is not going to be a compendium of licensed games. I realize that this video is basically an invitation for "you forgot about this" type of comments, but before you even have a chance to say that, I'm going to yell at you right here in the video. I cannot possibly discuss every title, so shut your gob. I love a lot of licensed games personally. In fact, one of my favorite ones to this day is Aladdin for the Genesis. So it's not really my goal to trash these games because the truth is I like a good chunk of them. I have a YouTube playlist dedicated to both praising and riffing on them because I've always liked the idea of extending some of my favorite movies, books, television shows, etc. and seeing how they translate into an interactive experience. They really do excite me despite the amount of clunkers out there, so if your cynical little fingers get the itch to attempt to tell me how somehow I don't like them, you're wrong. I even won a badge for beating the Aladdin challenge at a nerd convention, so bow down to my utter lack of being some kind of responsible adult in the name of a paltry video game award. What is my life? Seriously, what am I doing with all these video games? The first question I bring up may seem like an obvious one, but let's scrutinize it way too closely for the sake of entertainment anyway. Does the game stay true to the source material? This is actually a rather interesting question that can yield a variety of answers. Since video games are so broad, there's more than one way they can embody the source from which they came. They can follow a similar story, they can have visuals that closely resemble the original material, they can have their own unique story but are in the same style as the thing it's based on. Since games have varying mechanics and different ways of storytelling, there's some leeway to the idea of staying true to what they're referencing. So maybe the better question is, does the game represent the source material well? I think Aladdin for the Genesis definitely does. It's a side-scroller, so you're not exactly getting the full story the Disney adaptation told, but rather you're playing the more action-driven parts of the movie, like bouncing through Agrabah, the Cave of Wonders, riding the magic carpet. I don't really care about the story since, quite frankly, I already know it. I already like the story, that's why I'm playing this game in the first place. What I care about is whether or not it feels like Aladdin, and it does. It features music from the Disney soundtrack, the characters look the same since Disney animators were involved in development, the settings are also accurate to the movie, and it's just plain fun. A lot of the games based on Disney movies did very well, especially if Disney was involved. Not every game was a winner, but the majority of them really captured the feeling of what they were based on. In contrast, here's a game that failed completely, the Wayne's World adventure game. I'm not convinced any of the Wayne's World games really hit the mark, but the PC version published by Capstone was exceptionally abysmal. Upon first glance, it doesn't look too bad, it's your basic point-and-click fare, and I can tell the characters are Wayne and Garth, and this is a pretty good depiction of Wayne's basement.
Does this seem weird to anybody else? I mean, we're looking down on Wayne's basement. Only that's not Wayne's basement. Isn't that weird?
But there's nothing that makes this a Wayne's World game. The plot is about starting a pizzathon and Garth has a mutant tongue. The dialogue is trying way too hard and the story just doesn't fit the Wayne's World universe at all. It seems like the writers tried a little bit, remembering to put in key phrases every now and then, but ultimately this game could be about any two best friend characters going on an adventure. And sadly, the puzzles are on the tedious side, so it would not make for a fun experience regardless. Capstone was involved in publishing and sometimes developing mediocre licensed titles. Some of them almost hit the mark. I thought The Dark Half, based on the novel by Stephen King, at least showed that the creators understood the original material and tried to communicate it the best they could. It almost feels right, it's very atmospheric, but then you look at the main character and think, that ain't right. The story, though somewhat accurate, just didn't translate well into an adventure game, which brings us to our next inquiry. Does the property make sense as a game? This is a tough question to answer because, like a lot of creations, sometimes you can't determine whether it'll be good or not until it's done and you can see it in its entirety. For example, sometimes I'll write something in my script thinking I'm the most clever person on the planet, praising myself for the artistic genius I am, then later realize that what I wrote doesn't work well in video form. But there are a few things worth considering before developing a licensed title. Telltale Games are known for several of their licensed adventure games. The first ones I tried were their interpretations of Back to the Future and Jurassic Park, which were okay enough. Though for some reason I didn't think Back to the Future made for a great game. I think in general, engaging adventure games are hard to make just on their own, and when you have such a beloved franchise to live up to, it can fall short. However, they struck gold with The Walking Dead, which was based on the comic book series. I originally avoided this game because I thought it was going to follow the television series and be very zombie-centric, and at this point I am so sick of zombies, I purposely avoid content that features them. And I'd like to say that Frankenstein ladies are different and criminally underused, so if any developers are listening, feel free to get inspired by this video and make a title with sexy stitched-up women with attitude. After looking into The Walking Dead a little more, I realized it was less about zombies and more about the human stories and important decision-making. Though it does somewhat resemble the comic book series and have some parallels to the show, it follows a brand new story with different characters. It's essentially its own thing, set in the Walking Dead universe, and I think it works very well. This really does feel like an extra, separate piece of entertainment versus playing a game that follows an existing story verbatim. It was also a very smart move for Telltale. The popularity of the existing franchise helped to make this game both commercially and critically successful, and they've been praised for revitalizing the adventure game genre. It's also great if you enjoy being emotionally devastated. It can be a big challenge to convert an IP into a story-driven adventure game. Even though there have been just as many side-scrolling and platforming clunkers, it's especially hard to change a story just enough to where you have something new and fresh without regurgitating the original story back to the player. Here are a few more exceptions alongside The Walking Dead. I'm going to go ahead and touch on the Discworld games based on the works of Terry Pratchett. Years prior, his book The Color of Magic was translated into a text adventure game, and even though Pratchett was pleased with it overall, he was still very reluctant to grant Discworld licenses unless the developer truly cared about the property. AdventureSoft was one of the companies denied the license, so they went on to create Simon the Sorcerer, which was heavily inspired by the Discworld books. Designer Greg Barnett of Perfect 10 Productions negotiated with Pratchett over several months to convince him that he truly cared about the material, and after showing him a demo of the first game, Pratchett agreed to sign a deal. Barnett was true to his word. These point-and-click adventure games truly embody the Discworld universe. It's not only a gorgeous visual representation, but the music is fitting and the voice acting is top-notch and matches the humor style of the books. John Cleese was Barnett's first choice for the protagonist, Rincewind, but Cleese declined, stating that he does not do video games. He must have had a change of heart, because 3 years later he did voice work for Starship Titanic.
Excuse me, saying please don't touch me does not mean go on, do it again!
Instead, Eric Idle was chosen to voice Rincewind, and he does it perfectly.
Aha! Portalis Exitus, or the common doorway. See, I'm not a wizard for nothing, you know.
In fact, this game is almost too perfect. Not only does it feel like a Discworld book, it also plays like one, with overly absurd puzzles. They definitely fall right in line with Pratchett's writing style, but the outcome was obtuse gameplay. I personally think it's one of the hardest adventure games ever designed, but it's also one of the most respectful representations of an existing work. Callahan's Crosstime Saloon also does an amazing job of recreating Spider Robinson's collection of written works into a hilarious adventure game. I think genre and gameplay mechanics play a role in how successful a licensed game is as well. Titles that are built around mechanics can work well. Just look at Pong. The whole thing is built around how you play it. But for licensed games, it doesn't work as well. If you build a licensed game around a mechanic, you essentially end up with a skin, meaning you can swap out the characters and the settings, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. Like here in the Beverly Hillbillies. It offers different types of gameplay, including inventory object puzzles, driving puzzles, weird maze thingies, but the Beverly Hillbillies as the main idea seemed like an afterthought. Honestly, this game was developed because the movie was coming out, not because somebody wanted to make a great game. Nothing about it screams Beverly Hillbillies to me, it's just a cash-in. Same with this Miami Vice game, which again can be swapped out with any characters and nothing would be lost. And again here, the same goes for toys on the Super Nintendo, which almost looked cool, judging by the introduction, but it quickly loses all of its character by turning into a pretty basic game that could be based on anything. Look at the main character. They didn't even try to make this look like Robin Williams. Games like Aladdin, The Lion King, Star Trek, and GoldenEye were successful and work really well because they were built around an existing idea. The concept came first. They weren't necessarily working around mechanics or just the name itself. You cannot just swap out Aladdin with another character because there are a lot of elements from the movie coming together to make this work. Let's examine another failure of a game and determine why it turned out awful. Daria was a beloved show in the late 90s to early 2000s that, yes indeed, got a game. Now the graphics aren't the worst I've ever seen, the cutscenes look great, and tonally it does feel like the show, but the gameplay was just atrocious. This game wasn't just built around a gameplay mechanic, it was built around a boring one. I'm not sure why more care was not taken with this title. The television series had been out for 3 years by the time it was released, so it wasn't exactly made for promotion like the Beverly Hillbillies was, but it was still likely made for a few extra bucks due to the popularity of Daria at the time. So fuck accuracy, let's just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. It's interesting to think of how many licensed games have been released over time. It's like 90% of the market. Okay, fine, I made that number up, but it feels like it sometimes. The library of games is so massive that there is also a massive number of flops, but I'd argue there are more good ones than people even think. I would even say that they've gotten slightly better over time, but that might just be because technology has gotten better, and even the titles once considered good come across as cruddy due to these tech limitations. Every now and then I find a gem that seamlessly ties into the material from which it was derived, but it's easy to see why people think the majority of them are crappy. Name an existing franchise and you will likely find a game for it, even for things that existed before the creation of video games. I definitely have a soft spot for the decent ones, and there's clearly a way to develop them that can yield amazing results. Hell, there are even some titles that people prefer over the original works. Many people say they love the Walking Dead series, but not the comic or the television show. So I am absolutely in favor of making more games based on an IP, as long as they aren't made for just promotion or just cash purposes. I respect the hustle, trust me, but I also respect quality and developing something truly worth people's time and money. Meaning I am still waiting for a decent Wayne's World game. Any day now. Any day now. I do think many developers have found unique ways to portray existing franchises, using mechanics, story, and art style, but there are always ways to improve them as well. What makes a really great licensed title to you, and what are some of your favorites? Hell, what are some of your least favorites? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always interested in discovering more to either enjoy or even riff on, and sometimes the latter is equally as pleasurable as enjoyment. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was brought to you by my gorgeous patrons, so if you're interested in funding this channel, check out my campaign. I have a neat reward tier including robots. Well, robot paintings, not real robots. Sorry. Check out the description for more details, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.